Hello, I am going to be talking to you a little bit about your resume. Before you come to our first class, I'd like you to watch this entire PowerPoint presentation and then create the first draft of your resume. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. Your resume is a marketing piece. This is marketing yourself. You're trying to sell yourself to a company that you would like to intern at, or perhaps a company that you would like to work at later. So this is a tool for communication, so you need to think very carefully about what message you are trying to send and what chance you have of the receiver understanding the message you're sending, understanding the message that you're sending. So you need to emphasize a few things, such as things that you've done well, things you've done well in school, volunteer work, experience. You need to stress those aspects that make you a good candidate for the position that you're applying for, and perhaps even a better candidate than other people. And it is not an autobiography. And just to let you know, the average resume is looked at for about 10 seconds. So you have 10 seconds to get somebody's attention with this particular piece of communication. So it needs to be dynamic and compelling enough that that reader would like to meet you in person. Now there's a number of things that have to be in your resume. You need to include things such as your name, address, phone number, and email. Now, frankly, address, it is unlikely that you are going to be contacted via snail mail by any employer. However, your resume will go on file if you are hired, and this is one of the places where they may go back to look for information about you if they do need to send something to you. Anyways, put an address on there. There may be a time 5-10 years down the road where we'll say, don't put an address anymore. But for now, it's still considered normal. You'll want your email on there, but make sure it's a good email. You don't want to put I love Care Bears 99 at gmail.com as your email. Your Lee email is a great one to include. You're going to put your education. You're going to put things such as any licenses or certificates that you have. What are your skills and accomplishments, work history, job objectives, things like that. You may also put professional association memberships, honors, awards, volunteer activities, and you should have a bunch of these if you're a Lee student because we have all those service hours, and you can claim all those service hours as things that you want to talk about in your resume. So these are all things that you're going to include in the resume. Now let's also talk about things that you are not going to include. You are not going to list your age. You don't need to give a date of birth. You do not discuss your marital status. You do not put your height, weight, your pant size, anything of the sort. And you will find some templates online that do ask you to do these things, but don't. You're not going to put your race or ethnicity. You are not going to put your religion unless it is something that is required for the job. So it is potential if you're applying to work at the Church of God corporate offices, well, maybe something about religion might be appropriate. So you have been a member of such and such Church of God church for 18 years. Okay, but most of the time you're not going to put your religion. You are not going to put why you were terminated from a previous position if you have been terminated. You are not going to put a photo. And here, let me just say that there's a lot of templates online that automatically have a place for you to put a photo of yourself. Don't do it. So if you download one of those templates, put something else in that circle where they want your photo to go. Maybe make a little monogram or something like that, because you are not going to put a photo of yourself in here. Trust me, if they're interested in finding out some more about you, the people looking at your particular looking at your particular resume will turn to social media, and they're going to look you up on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram. And if they want to, they can find a picture of you, but you are not going to put it there yourself. Why not? It's led to a lot of discrimination over the years. So we just want to focus on people's qualifications. We do not want to focus on what they look like. You're also not going to put high school information. If you're taking this class at Lee University, you are out of high school for enough years that it's no longer something that you need to put. We are going to assume that if you're a second semester junior or higher at Lee, you should have graduated from high school. So let's talk a little bit more about the resume and what you want to have in it. You are going to want to start out with an objective. You'll talk about your education, experience, internships, skills, honors, affiliations, and references. Now let me break it down and talk about each of those items. First of all, an objective. You should have a focused objective, something specific that you are looking for with this particular position. So you want to be clear about what it is you're looking for. Are you looking for an internship? Are you looking for an entry-level job? Are you, what is it that you're looking for? And mention the particular types of skills that you would like to use. You're not going to mention that you just want to advance or anything really vague like that. We want to be specific and target a particular position. So for example, I have a basic objective here, seeking an entry-level position in the field of public relations. Now this is just basic, but it's specific. You could also say seeking an internship opportunity in social media and advertising, something like that. Basic, quick, again. Your resume is going to get about a 10-second look, so we're not going to make this super fancy. Education. You want to list your degrees in reverse order. So we want to have your most recent degree at the top and your lowest degree at the bottom of the list. If you have an associate's degree, you would want to put that on here. If you have any type of honors, such as if you graduated cum laude, or if you will graduate cum laude, you would put that on there, and any type of certifications. Now, I know many people aren't certified while they're in college, but we may have somebody who could be certified in Avid or Photoshop, something such as that, or if you've done anything such as we had the advertising ethics certification last year. So something like that, this would be an appropriate place to put it. Here is an example of how your resume might look and be. The next thing you want to be listing out is your education. Do you have any type of volunteer experience? And here we want to have volunteer experience that's targeted to what you are looking to do in your internship or eventually in your job. So we don't want to have just anything in there. So if you volunteered one time for 2 hours to help clean up trash off a street, that probably isn't going to be a great thing here. But if you were involved with adopt a grandparent and formed a relationship with someone, or if you volunteered for a festival and helped with some type of PR experience or event planning, that would be great. And then of course we want to have our paid jobs as well. So in general, you're going to be listing a company, the location of where that company is found, the date of your employment, your job title, and your relevant duties. You're going to want to use a lot of action verbs when it comes to talking about this job. So you don't want to say something like, was responsible for helping customers make purchases. You want to use action verbs. So assisted customers in selection of clothing choices or something like that, so that we get a nice action verb there. You want to put some duties that were, what are some of the things that you're responsible for. Use phrases. Use past tense verbs when you're talking about things that were jobs that you had in the past. But anything that is a job you currently have, you would use present tense verbs. Generally, you're going to use bullet points for your different job duties as opposed to writing this in paragraph form. So here is an example. So we have the name of the company, the people company, where it is, Malibu, California, the title, PR intern, and here we have when this job was had in summer 2017. And then we have 3 different duties. Reviewed current social media campaign, and notice that we have the active verb reviewed. So it doesn't say something like was asked to look at old campaigns or responsible for looking at old campaigns. We just have a good, solid reviewed. The next one, design, tested, and implemented new process for Facebook posts. So again, very strong verb choice here. Tracked analytics and recommended adjustments. Again, great use of active verbs as opposed to passive verbs. Formatted. Most resumes are going to include some discussion of references. Now, sometimes you can actually put your references on a resume, but since a resume is so short, and we know that it only takes about 10 seconds for the employer to look at it, most of the time we don't recommend putting references on that resume. So a lot of times we just have a category heading at the bottom of the resume that says references available upon request. And that way, if they're interested in you and they ask for your references, you can send them a separate sheet, and in that separate sheet you'll have the 3 professional references, in which you should put the reference's business address and professional title. So if one of your references is a professor, you would want to put that professor's name and what their actual job title is. So you wouldn't want to say, like for instance, if somebody wanted to use me as a reference, they wouldn't want to say Doc Mo -teacher. You would say Margaret Mo, PhD, professor of communication. And then you would use the business address. So we'd have my Lee mailing address and my Lee phone number. So I often have students do this on the separate page so that you can send it to your potential employer if they ask for it. Now, real important is that you ask the references ahead of time if they are comfortable being listed as a reference for you. And so you need to ask them, may I use you as a reference? A lot of time you will have your reference saying, of course, that'd be great, yes. If you sense any hesitation, if your reference says, okay, I might not use that person. If you ask the person and they say, Mm, I'd rather not. I'm kind of busy. I'm not sure I'll have time to answer a question if somebody calls me. Then you need to run in the opposite direction because that person is not going to give you a good recommendation. And I had a time where a student a few years ago didn't ask me about using me as a recommendation, and he is not somebody that I would recommend. We'd had a very distasteful experience where he'd come in my office and yelled at me at the top of his lungs and threatened to go to Dr. Khan and tell him to fire me. So after that, he wasn't really somebody that I felt comfortable saying this would be a great employee since he had such a bad temper. Anyways, he put me as a reference, and when I was given a call, I just had to say, I'm sorry, I declined to provide a recommendation for this student. I didn't give him a bad recommendation. I didn't talk about the experience that I had with him. I just said that I declined the opportunity to provide a recommendation. But that speaks pretty loudly, and the student did not get the job. So be careful. Only put people down that you think will give you a good reference. Could be professors, could be employers that you've had before, or any type of volunteer supervisor. And sometimes a mixture of those is a good idea. There are a few optional categories that you can put down on a resume, things such as honors and activities. So, an honor might be if you received some type of grant or scholarship, or if you were perhaps an officer in a club, if you were given some type of recognition. Let's say perhaps you were given the award for having the top essay in your freshman composition class. I would go ahead and put that down. I would say top paper award in English 111. You may also put down professional organizations. So if you're involved in PRSSA, if you're involved in the Film Society or the Lee Advertising Federation, these things should go on there. If you have computer skills that are relevant to the job, I would go ahead and put them down. Now, there's a little bit of disagreement about how much of computer skills you should put down. There are some people who recommend that you include a standard statement that says you're proficient in Microsoft Office, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. And then there are some who don't think that this is needed. I'm one who thinks that it's not important to put down these basic programs if you just use them on an everyday basis and you're not excellent in them. So for instance, if you use Microsoft Word to type up papers, great. You would be expected to do that with most jobs and internships you apply for. So unless you've had a class in Microsoft Word and you know all these cool tricks that most people don't know, I wouldn't put Microsoft Word down as being something that you have a skill in. Same thing with Excel or PowerPoint. If you can just use them and get by with them, don't put it down. But if you've had a class in Excel and you can do all sorts of cool things with spreadsheets, great, then put it down. But don't put it down if you just can use Excel to alphabetize a set of names. That's not enough. So if you've had any publications and have done original research, these are all things that could go on your resume as well. And here's an example of what that might look like. So in this case, honor and activities, we have Dean's List, Centennial Scholar, PRSSA, Race for the Cure, Helping Hands Feeding Ministry, and then our references are available upon request. Some basics about the resume in general is that it is going to be one page. And I'm going to be pretty strong about this, that you just want to have a one-page resume. Again, remember, the person's only going to look at it for about 10 seconds before deciding whether or not to give you a call or send you an email to talk with you a little bit more. If it is longer than one page, often that means it's going into the trash can because it's wasting the time of the person who is reading your resume. There is very little about most college-age students that warrant having a longer resume. So it looks conceited to have a longer resume unless you have a good reason for it. Now, what are the good reasons? Well, if you have an advanced degree, you have a master's or a PhD, then you can have a longer document. It actually becomes what's called a curriculum vitae, and that is almost always going to be longer than one page. In fact, they can be 5 to 10 pages, sometimes even longer, but that's for somebody who has that specific experience. And then it's asking about all the different things you can teach and what you've studied and researched, and it's just asking for a different type of information. And then if you have worked at a company for 45 years and you're looking for a position as a president or a CEO, well, maybe then you can take 2 to 3 pages for a senior executive resume, because that's pretty impressive. And there are probably a lot of things you could say about what you've done. But if you're 21, 22 years old, not likely that you're going to have that kind of experience. So cut it down to one page. If you are going to be printing your paper, your resume on paper, you will want to use a white or a neutral colored paper. So cream, eggshell, a soft dove gray is fine, but you want to have just a kind of neutral paper. It's going to be a thicker paper than normal. It's not just your regular copier paper. It's 24-pound paper, and it usually has some cotton in it, and it has a nice feel and touch to it. It's that basic size as a regular paper though, 8.5 by 11. And if you can, I always buy cover letter and envelope so that they all match. They have a good tactile feel, and it looks like you're organized when you do that. The next thing I want to mention is the ATS, or the Applicant Tracking System. This is a screening tool that is used by some companies to go through resumes when they first get them in. So the first resume examination is not done by a person, it's done by a machine, basically. And that machine is going to look for keywords in what you're saying to make sure that you match what they want. And so you are going to want to use a lot of keywords in your resume, things that are considered buzzwords in your industry, and conventional headlines. So if you are looking at an internship site and they say they want a social media intern, I am going to make sure that my resume has things that has, for instance, I'm going to say social media a couple times in there, hopefully. And then I'm going to talk about particular platforms that I have experience in: Facebook, Instagram, that I know how to read Google Analytics, and that I have experience in search engine optimization, or SEO. So I'm going to want to put those things in there because this tool is going to be looking for words like that. If it doesn't find enough, a human is never going to see your resume. So you have to make it through the bots first, and then hopefully you can make it to a human. The other thing to know is that you have to have the conventional headlines. You can't decide that you don't want to use a headline such as education or experience because you want to do something cooler or more attention getting. So I had a student a few years ago who wanted to, instead of education, wanted to have the heading to say what I've learned. And then under experience wanted to have the headline what I've done. Now, it can be kind of cute, I guess, But the problem is it's not going to make it through the ATS. You're going to get kicked out and nobody's going to see it. So that's a problem. Students often wonder about creative resumes and trying to have something that's not as traditional and thinking about having something a little more visually appealing. A lot of disciplines, a lot of jobs don't use creative resumes, and so you have to be careful. If you're going to be applying for an internship in an office that is very traditional, I probably would not submit a creative resume. So for instance, if I'm applying for an internship at Blue Cross Blue Shield, if I'm applying for an internship at Life Care Centers of America, I'm not going to use a creative resume. I'm going to use a traditional one. But if I'm going to apply for a job at an ad agency, I might use one. So, who should use one? The ones that I find are most likely to use them would include media positions and graphic design, advertising, and public relations. These are places where we have some more creativity that's allowed, and they like to see you mixing it up a bit, just a tiny bit on the resume. We're not going to get crazy and wild with it, but we can use color or layout to make our resume more attractive. And sometimes the visual resumes can just help you with organizing material as well. Sometimes when people are doing the traditional resume, it just looks like this big lump of information. But if you use a more creative one, you can kind of see how things separate a bit easier. And so it might help you sometimes to do a creative one, but then pull it back into a traditional one. You need to be aware of what are the advantages and disadvantages of creative resume. So first of all, advantages. If you're a good designer, this will showcase your skills. It also gives a sample of your point of view. What type of designer are you? What is your aesthetic? It reduces an emphasis on work history. So if you haven't had a lot of work history, this kind of takes away that a problem with that. It's not so glaringly obvious that you haven't done as many jobs as other people may have. And it's just kind of eye-catching. So somebody may look at it for 15 seconds instead of 10 seconds. So what are the disadvantages? Well, many companies do prefer traditional, and so you just have to be aware there are some companies that will not respond well to a creative one. Another disadvantage is eye gaze. Because there's so much to look at with a creative resume, it can create a little bit of chaos sometimes, and the eye doesn't know exactly where to look. So you have to be careful about this. Another disadvantage is sometimes people just do things that aren't all that appropriate for a resume. And I'll show you an example of that. And sometimes there's just poor design. And so you've done this creative resume, but it just looks awful. And so that's not going to help you get the job. All right, I'm going to show you an example of a more creative resume that works. So this one is great because it does have some color. It has a nice sense of proportion of using proximity and balance here, where we have the two columns and the one takes up about a third of the page. The second column takes up 2/3 of the page. Very easy to read and see. So I like this one. A second one here, similar idea to it. We have the two columns and good proportion, and you can see how they've separated out this information. One thing I want to point out in the top left corner where we have the little wreath with the AM monogram in the middle. This particular template you can get online, and a lot of times that suggests that people put a photograph of themselves where that monogram is. And this is what I don't want you to do. So any templates you see online that expect you to put a photo of yourself, unless you're applying for a modeling or a news anchor job, don't do it. All right, so this is just another good basic creative one. Now let's look at a couple creative ones that are not good. So these are some bigger problems. My Little Resume, based on My Little Pony. This is not going to get you your job. Even if you're applying with Hasbro to work with My Little Pony, I don't think they would like this. It just takes a theme and it goes too far. It goes into kind of kitsch. And I don't know if this is a serious one. This could have been just a joke that somebody created to begin with, but it's something you would not want to do. Another example is this of another resume that has gone much too far in the creative element. So what we have here is that somebody wanted to use design that was probably cutting edge in 2005 when people first started building lots of web pages and learning very basic HTML, and they came up with really ugly stuff that looked like this. So to me, this resume looks like it came from 2005 web design class, and it's awful. So this would be the type of thing that if somebody would see this in the communication field, they couldn't burn it fast enough. It's just bad. This is an interesting one here for this example. It's not a good resume. However, there is something pleasing about it. It's not terrible like the last two. If somebody was going for a job for layout and design of magazines or books, this type of design is appropriate for those types of jobs. However, it still doesn't work for a resume. So I might put something in my portfolio that looks like this, but I would never turn this in as a resume. And of course, it's not perfect from a page layout either, but I really put it in here just as an example of something that, oh, this could be good or interesting, but not for a resume. So we want to avoid this. So even your creative resumes, they need to look much more traditional than this does. Last thing to talk about today with this PowerPoint is font choice. I know many students think, wouldn't it be great if I could just use these decorative fonts that I've learned in different classes and just make it really unique and personal for me? And the answer is no. It wouldn't be cool, wouldn't be neat, because it probably means your resume isn't going to be looked at. You have to use pretty traditional font choices. Now, of course, our classic is Times New Roman, and that is a serif font, which means it has little feet on it, little feet. And so this is one that you will find used a lot. Now, there are other serif fonts, such as Georgia, Gaudi, Old Style, and Garamond. And these are also good traditional fonts to use. I personally like Georgia for a little bit more elegant look. And I like Garamond just because it is a very easily legible font. It's very easy to read. It looks a little bit more custom than Times New Roman does. So I think any of those are good serif fonts, and I'm going to use them for some of my larger elements. Often I will use these for my headings, like where I say objective, experience, honors, and awards. And I could also use them for the text when I'm explaining what my honors and awards were, when I'm explaining where I received my education. But I could also, at that point, when I'm talking about some of those details, I could go with a sans serif font. And sans serif means that it does not have feet. And so here we have our popular ones: Arial, Century Gothic, Lucida Sans, Tahoma. And so these are ones that are good for that longer body copy, easy to read as well. And so any of these could work. So don't go crazy with your font choices. Keep them pretty traditional even if you do a creative resume. All right, that's it for our PowerPoint that I wanted you to watch before the first day of class. And what I'd like you to do is have a first draft of your resume done before class meets for the first time. Bring 2 copies of that to class, and I will be taking a look at it, and we'll also be doing some peer evaluation as well. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye-bye.